Welcome. It is snowing pretty hard here between Gunnison and Crested Butte, so it's most appropriate that we have a history of skiing in the Gunnison country. I want to also put a little plug in for Pete Dunda, who will be playing the polka, Christmas polka party here at the museum on December the 28th. Ought to be a lot of fun. Our lead sponsors, of course, have already been mentioned. That's great. We will have a trivia question, actually two trivia questions at the end. First come, first serve, and there'll be two questions over the material that we cover tonight. So here's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to give you about 4 pictures that we're going to show immediately. I'm going to give about a 7 to 10 minute introduction, and then we've got 82 photos of skiing in the Gunnison country, and I think you'll really enjoy them. So here we go. When I talk about the Gunnison country and skiing, if there was ever an area made for skiing, it's the Gunnison country. One of the best in the nation, maybe one of the best in the world. Very high elevation, 9 to 13,000 feet or so, cold weather, champagne powder, steep terrain. You couldn't have it any better. So we've got a great early history of skiing in this area. Goes all the way back to the year 1860 when a Methodist missionary named John Franklin Dyer made his way from Granite over Lake Pass at the north end of Taylor Park, came over to Dead Man's Gulch near Cement Creek and Spring Creek, where he found the bleaching bones of 7 miners who had been killed by Indians the year before. From there, he made his way down Cement Creek and up Washington Gulch, where he preached to 250 miners at a place called Minersville. And Father Dyer did that in the winter on skis. One of the other great missionaries was a guy named George Darley from Lake City. And George Darley in the middle 1870s would ski from Lake City over Engineer or Cinnamon Pass and bring the Bible down to the head of the Animas River to towns like Animas Forks and Eureka and Silverton. He wrote a book about his experiences called Pioneering in the San Juan. And Father Dyer also wrote a great book about his experiences called Snowshoe Itinerant. So if you have a chance, either one of those would give you a real good idea what went on about 150, 160 years ago. The great rush to the Gunnison country began in 1879 with great silver discoveries. Pitkin, Gothic, White Pine, Irwin, all were created. Thousands of people coming in. The only way you could get around at that time in the wintertime was by skis. The railroad had not yet arrived. Of course, it wouldn't go into all the mining camps anyway. And with the tremendous snow, many of the miners who were from Scandinavia and Canada introduced something called snowshoeing. Now, snowshoeing at that time meant skiing today. Canadian webs were used to describe snowshoes. So Canadian webs at that time are what we call snowshoes today, and skis are what they called snowshoeing at that time. The snowshoes weren't very good in the light powder. More about that later on. The skis that individuals used were 11 to 14 feet long. They weighed 8 pounds. They had a leather toe attachment where you could stick your mining boot in, a 4-inch heel block to where your heel could come up and not go back, and dope or wax on the bottom, beeswax usually. And then they had a 7 to 9 foot long guide pole. And that guide pole was there to give you balance, propel you forward, and most importantly, if you got going too fast, you'd put it between your legs and hopefully come to a stop. Everybody used the telemark turn if, in fact, you were able to turn. Most of the time you weren't with skis that long. The turn didn't always work, and to avoid crashing into boulders or trees, one simply leaped off your skis into the heavy snow. And lanyards or little leather straps connected on your belt to the skis kept your skis from going into oblivion. The early sport of skiing was not for the faint of heart. We'll go to another picture. This picture you're looking at right now is at Irwin in 1883. And you can see the guide poles and you can see the long skis that they had. We'll go to a next photograph right now. And the next one coming up is a real good example of the length of the skis. let's say these guys are about 5'10". Those skis are probably at least 10 feet long. And again, back in the 1880s. The early sport of skiing was not for the faint of heart. A skier in the Gunnison country recalled, and I'm quoting now, "I would say to those who are about to make their first attempt that the one quality they must have is confidence. They must at least feel some security. What is needed is conceit. A little of this gives the courage one needs." Harry Cornwall, a mining engineer from Irwin, who wrote memoirs about what happened in that area back in the 1880s, 1880 and 1881, said this, and I'm quoting, "We sent east for regular Canadian web shoes, but they were useless. The Colorado snow was so light that wearing them, we sank below our knees and travel was impossible. Skis were imperative, and we were all busy making them. Fire-killed spruce timber was used. There were a few carpenters in camp, and by wrapping the toes of our skis in burlap and boiling them in our largest camp kettles, we were able to make a pretty good bond for the toes." We'll go to the next photograph right now. And there's a great example of a race that we'll talk about a little later on. This is in Crested Butte in 1881. Two guys coming down, straight down, no gates. The guy got to the bottom first was the winner. A couple of legendary individuals skied in the Gunnison country very early. One we've heard a lot about, and that's Al Johnson. Al Johnson was the postmaster, mine owner, store owner of Crystal, right along the Crystal River, north of Crested Butte. And for years in the 1880s, he and his brother Fred, who had grown up in the San Laurentian Mountains of Canada and learned to ski there, carried the mail in the winter, going through past Emerald Lake and down past the Devil's Punch Bowls, down that very steep grade through the Crystal Canyon. Another one of the great postman was a guy named Alex Parent of Tin Cup, who carried the mail on horseback in the summer, skis in the winter for 38 years, 1880 to 1918, and get a load at look at his route. He would start over at St. Elmo on the eastern slope at Chalk Creek, make his way over Tin Cup Pass at 12,154 feet into Tin Cup, then 20 miles through Taylor Park, then over 11,800 foot high Taylor Pass, down Express Creek into Ashcroft, and 11 miles further down into Aspen. That trip usually took about 3 days on skis. And another one of the great postmen was a guy named Louis Barthel, who carried the mail from Crested Butte to Gothic along the banks of the East River. Great tour races occurred in the Gunnison country from 1881 to 86. All these great mining camps like Irwin and Gothic and Pitkin and Crystal and Marble all had great skiers, and on weekends they would compete. And the greatest of all the races was held on Gibson Ridge on Washington's birthday in 1886, when Charlie Bainey, a 16-year-old boy, defeated the great Al Johnson in a race down Gibson Ridge at speeds estimated at 60 miles an hour to go into the history books. Al Johnson later on died early of consumption in Arizona, probably TB, what we call that today. Charlie Bainey became a brakeman on the Rock Island line and came back in 1928 to Crested Butte to relive some of those great memories. In 1893, the silver crash wiped out almost all the silver towns, and as they say, the great days were all gone. However, locals continued to ski. Cupelo Hill behind Mountaineer Bowl, Quicks Hill across from Cement Creek, Pershing Mine Hill on today's lower loop in Crested Butte, Gibson Ridge just south of the CF&I Big Mine, Chicken Ranch about a mile up the Slate River, and also on the flank of Mount Emmons. And then came the ski areas, and we're about to see some of them. Pioneer, 3 miles up Cement Creek, 1939 and 40, the first year. First chairlift in Colorado history. Pershing Mine Hill, about a mile up the lower loop today. A jump and a rope tow for the kids, 1951 to 53. Rosman Hill on the Rosman Ranch, about 4 miles south of Crested Butte. 2 rope tows, a jump, collegiate ski races, 1951 to 1951 to 1961. And then during the winter 1961-62, Crested Butte ski area. Eventually, there would be 11 areas in the Gunnison country and the surrounding region that had ski lifts. So these guys you're looking at are at the Revenue Mine in Yankee Boy Basin, way up above Ouray in 1886. So with that in mind, the little introduction is over. We are now going to go to the photos, and I'm going to comment on each one of them as Stu will give you number one.
Just give me 1 second to switch over to it. Stop the share.
And there we go. We've already shown that one. Those are two guys skiing in Irwin, Colorado, 1883. Next. There is the famous La Vida Hotel in Gunnison, 4.5 stories high. This is 1884. Teak and mahogany, gold lace, crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs. One bystander referred to it as a peacock among mud hens. And that building in front still stands today, and that's the Edgerton House. And right behind it, they had a lunch counter that still stands today. And these are people ice skating right to the east of the La Vida Hotel, 1884. Next. Now, the guy in front here is Al Johnson on the right. This is Irwin, 1883. This is a great shot of how long the skis were. You can see the broken kind of guide poles that people had. This is not après ski, but that's the way they skied. And this one actually is in Irwin, about 1883. Next. There is the famous Elk Mountain House, right on Elk Avenue, 3 stories high. Crested Butte's answer to the La Vida Hotel. Famous old place. Next. There is the City Hall in Crested Butte. They had a big fire in 1893, and it looked like it was going to spread and take out much of Elk Avenue. So the people in Crested Butte got together with the fire department, and they figured that they should dynamite a couple of buildings to keep the fire from spreading. But what they failed to realize was that there was dynamite and explosives in the building that they blew up. So instead of blowing up 2 buildings, they blew up 6 and drove a gaping hole into the fire hall. Now that building still stands today, and it's right across from Cochevers on the west end of Elk Avenue. Next. There is the Crested Butte Depot. This is in the 1880s. The depot still stands today, used for other purposes by Crested Butte. And that is where the Denver and Rio Grande arrived on November the 21st, 1881. And a new era came in the history of Crested Butte. Next. There is the Crested Butte Ski Club, 1886. And again, you see they had their own uniforms, long skis. Every one of these towns had a ski club. Gunnison, Irwin, Crystal, Marble, Tin Cup. And every weekend in the wintertime, they'd get together at a different place, and they would have ski races with a lot of money wagered and a lot of betting going on and a lot of drinking going on as people bet on their favorites. Next. There is Mr. and Mrs. Carl Bergman, and they are out where the Crested Butte Golf Course is today, not far from Lake Grant. And you can see that Mrs. Bergman has skis that are pretty darn big. And you can see Mr. Bergman has them pretty big too. And you can see how the tips are boiled up. They were boiled in camp kettles. This again, 1880s. Next. Now the guy in front again is the legendary skier Al Johnson. And this is at Irwin right before a race in 1883 as all these guys gathered. Irwin located at 10,000 feet, and of course, Scarp Ridge in the background. So they had very steep terrain to race on as they raced from up above Irwin Lake, and they usually finished up right on Irwin Lake, which of course was frozen over. Next. There is the Crystal Snowshoe Club. Now remember, what they call snowshoes then are skis today. And there they are on a Sunday outing. Blizzard conditions, long skis. You're not dressed like we are today. They're dressed in their ordinary clothing. Next. There's a little boy in 1890 up Ohio Creek, about 5 miles up Ohio Creek. Now he's got long skis. He's got a little guide pole. But as you can see, that dog is absolutely bored because that little kid isn't going very far on those skis and on flat ground. But that's how you learn how to ski. Back in the early days, you put those kids on skis early. And of course, in Crested Butte today, they do it probably even earlier. 2 years old, 3 years old, they're already on skis with mom or dad. Next. There's a little girl named Esther in Marble in 1906. You can see the primitive shoes that she has, the long skis and no guide pole, and dressed in very modest clothing. Next. This is at Animas Forks, Colorado, 1913. The people are unknown, long skis, guide pole, dog. There was so much snow that year near Animas Forks, which is right where the head of the Animas River is, above Silverton, not far from Lake City, that snow covered up the telegraph wires, which were 25 feet above the ground. Next. This is a great shot of Crested Butte in 1907, and I'll kind of read that for you. It says, ready to start snowshoeing. This is before, as I have labeled. I wish I had a photograph of after. You would not have recognized them as the same party. So it must have been a tough day on skis. Once again, you can see how high those skis are. Next. There again are two people near Lake Grant in 1913, not far from Crested Butte, just a little south of Crested Butte, and about where the ski area is today. You get a good idea of how long that guide pole is, probably about 9 feet for the man and about 6 feet for the woman. Next. There is Elk Avenue, 1884, Crested Butte. Elk Mountain House on the left. Dirt roads. You can see the water flowing on the right, irrigation ditch. Had wooden planks for a sidewalk. And you can see the west end of town, and that's where Joe Rosman later on had a sawmill. And you can see a little high ground there, and the locals called that Chocolate Peak. And that is where a lot of the kids, they built up a jump, and they would jump off of that. And they would also use toboggans to come down the old road, not the road we go on today, but the old road. Next. There is a shot of the Camp Bird mine out of Ouray, about 7 miles up. And they are people who work, miners that worked at the Camp Bird mine that are skiing down. Again, this is about 1890. Next. These are Western State College students and Gunnison locals playing Crack the Whip on Quicks Hill, just across from Cement Creek and about 7 miles south of Crested Butte. Now, I would submit to you that I played Crack the Whip in the playground on flat ground, and it was a little tricky then. So Crack the Whip is really tricky when you're coming down a steep slope like that. Next. There is a shot of a man named Fred Brand, who graduated from Western State in 1932, and he gave me that photo. This is on Quicks Hill. And Fred told me that we were all afraid to go off of that jump, but nobody wanted to be called chicken. So here he is on a toboggan going off the jump. He's going about 35 miles an hour. He's about 10 feet off the ground. He's still rising. He's got a flying helmet on, and the two guys behind him are scared as hell watching him. Next. There is the warming house on the Pioneer ski area, which opened up now the winter of 1939-40, 3 miles up Cement Creek. And the Pioneer guest cabins today still has the old warming house as a cabin. Now, as you'll see, that they had very primitive chairs, and locals got cables. They got other towers from a mine up around Cumberland Pass, not far from Tin Cup. The locals like Wes McDermott and Ryle Lake and Art Fordham made chairs in their garage. And then this thing opened up during the winter 39 and 40. Next. There is one of the chairs. Now, I always jokingly like to say when the Forest Service, which didn't know anything about ski areas, obviously, 39 and 40, when they saw how high those chairs were above the ground in the fall of the year with no snow, they said, you got to lower that chair. People fall out, they're going to get killed. And then about 15 to 20 feet of snow fell. And now you had so much snow that sometimes people's knees were up under their chin as they went to the top. Next. There is a shot of the top of the Pioneer ski area heading down, very steep runs. Everything's a fall away turn. You're never going straight down. You're always leaning one way or the other. And you can see Crested Butte Mountain in the background as skiers come down in a snowplow turn off that very steep terrain at Pioneer. Next. There is the warming house and there is the lift. The lift was called Comet. The runs were called the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, and Milky Way. Next. Now we go to Rosamond Hill. And the guy in the air right now, Rosamond Hill opened up during the winter of 51, 52 on the John Rosamond Ranch about 4 miles south of Crested Butte. Western States ski team was looking for a jump and also for some good terrain for the downhill skiing. And the guy in midair is a 1952 Olympian named Crosby Perry Smith, who was on the first Western States ski team. And Crosby passed away about a month ago at the age of 98, would have been 99. And I was very privileged to go to Steamboat Springs and give his eulogy. He was a great friend. He used to come up and ski in his middle 80s. We'd get him a room. He and Thor Groswald was also on the first Western State team. We'd get him a room at the Nordic Inn. We'd have breakfast and then we'd ski. But he was a 1952 Olympian going aloft at Rosamond Hill. Next. There is the late great Buddy Werner skiing at Rosamond Hill. Buddy Werner from Steamboat Springs was called the Steamboat Springs Cowboy because whenever he went back to Europe, all of his friends from around Europe wanted him to bring back the most favorite gift they could ever have, and that was a cowboy hat. Hence the name Steamboat Springs, the Steamboat Cowboy, or the Steamboat Springs Cowboy. Buddy Werner competed in the 64 Olympic Games. He would have been a favorite in the downhill in the 60 Games, but he broke his leg right before. And then right after the 64 Games, he was killed in an avalanche at Valseline, Switzerland, while helping make a promotional movie for Willy Bogner. The whole town of Steamboat Springs turned out. Buddy Werner was buried there, and they changed the name of the mountain from Storm Mountain to Mount Werner. He is the only American ever to win the downhill at the famous Hahnenkamm at Kitzbühel, Austria. Now, Darren Rawls won it one year, but that's when they didn't have a lot of snow and they only ran halfway. And they say when you win at Kitzbühel, the downhill at Kitzbühel, you'll never again buy a meal or a glass of beer in all of Austria. Next. There is Rosamond Hill, and they're carrying in the volunteer ski patrol, bringing in an injured skier. This is about 1954, and you can see the Crested Butte Mountain in the background. Next. Now there's a great shot of the jump at Rosamond Hill, and tremendous crowds. You can see the judges stand right there in the middle, right lower middle. They would judge the jumpers. This is the slalom course, and you can see the cars piled up almost all the way to Highway 135. Whenever they had a collegiate ski race, literally 1,000 people or more turned out. Next. There you see the jumping stand on the left, and you can see a guy coming off the jump and the big W for Western State right on the bottom of the jump. And the maximum jump there was about 150 feet. And John Rosman, the rancher, was very kind in allowing Sven Wick and the Western State ski team to use that. The guy who really put that together was a fellow by the name of Frank LaFay. And Frank LaFay enrolled for 12 hours of independent study at Western State. His job was to build the lift. And the rope tows operated off of the back wheel of an automobile. Frank did his job well, and he got 12 hours of A work, all independent study. Next. Now we go to the lower loop. And some of you folks from Crested Butte will identify that cement structure there in the background. Locals call it the Gronk. But that was nothing more than part of the Pershing Mine. And that is the Pershing Mine Hill, built 1951 to 53 by locals so the local kids could jump and ski. And here's a kid going aloft. Lasted for about 3 years until Rosman really got rolling. Next. There's a guy coming off the jump. That is Jim Gibson coming off the jump. And he's got his jumping skis on. He's getting some pretty good elevation. Probably the maximum jump there was about 60, 70 feet. Pershing Mine Hill, right across from Erickson's Steakhouse and the Pershing Mine, coal mine up the lower loop. Next. There's one of the greatest skiers ever in the Gunnison country. This is Steve Krismanich, 1952 on Pershing Mine Hill. Now with that the primitive skis, primitive bindings, very heavy poles. I mean, that is tremendous angulation. And Steve Krismanich was as good as it got as he runs a slalom on the Pershing Mine Hill in 1952. Next. There is a shot of the Crested Butte ski area in 1948, long before there was a ski area. That's the way it looked. Next. There is Dick Eflin, the founder with Fred Rice of the Crested Butte ski area during the winter of 61, 62. Dick passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. He is playing in Erickson's Steakhouse, and his wife Liz is on the right. She's still alive, lives out in Florida. And on the left, looking up, is Paul Johnston. And Paul had the first place where you could stay called the Ore Bucket, which is about where the Chamber of Commerce building is today. Later on, he went to Vail, opened up a great place called the Tivoli. I gave a talk there a number of years ago, went to visit him, but they said, well, he wouldn't recognize you. He had dementia, and he passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. Dick Eflin was a Air Force guy who had heard about Crested Butte from a fellow airman who had once been in Crested Butte. And he always wanted to open up a ski area, which he did with Fred Rice, a Kansas University fraternity brother, during the winter of 1961-62. Next. There is the ski area right when it opened. Warming house on the left, the gondola shack on the right. If you look carefully, you can see the gondolas making their way up. A little more about the gondolas later on. The gondolas were Italian gondolas, and we were the second ones to open up in Colorado. Vail beat us by 1 month. Crested Butte gondola opened up January 63. Next. There is the warming house just built. That building you see on the lower right, that is the J-Bar building. And they had a little J-Bar lift. They had a J-Bar and a T-Bar when the Crested Butte ski area first opened up. That picture is early 1963. And the warming house had just been built. Next. There is the scene of many great moments for myself and many early skiers in Crested Butte. That is one of the Molensic building barns. When Dick Eflin started the ski area, he bought the Molensic Ranch, and the Forest Service, of course, gave him a permit. And that's one of their barns, and that was called the Beer Stube, where The music was always hot. The women were very good looking, and the beer was always cold. And a guy always played the banjo in there. And they used to say right when he passed away, one of his friends said, you know, Vandenbush, Buck Kelly, his name was, he said, Kelly always liked you, probably because you were the only faculty member who enjoyed his music. All the other people were young like me, and they did enjoy that music. That's right where West Wall is today, and right below where the T-bar used to be. Next. There is the warming house and some of the people enjoying a beverage. On the left was Dr. Leroy Simmons. We called him Dr. Leroy Penguin because on Flushing he skied with a black tuxedo and a black stovepipe hat. Don Spickelmeyer next to him, Bobby Knowles next to him, and Dick Erickson next to him. 1963 beer stube. Next. This is the winter of 63-64. That's St. Patrick's Church on Maroon Avenue in Crested Butte. And to say that this was a great snow year would be an understatement. The guy's got a wedge plow trying to plow out the road. Next. There are 4 skiers at Steamboat Springs in 1920. And the reason I got that photo is, as Bob Dylan said, the times, they are a-changin'. The 3 women on the right have guide poles. The lady on the left has got 2 ski poles with baskets. The times were beginning to change. Next. The man in the middle is Bill Calkins, who ran a florist shop in Gunnison for a long time, right not far from the college. And they are shooting rabbits. You see the guys with a rifle. They are shooting rabbits right where the railroad yards are in South Gunnison. And that would not be very far from the Gunnison Airport today. 1924, get a load of the length of those skis, and they're out shooting rabbits. Next. Now we come to a series of photos who, in my opinion, the greatest skier ever to ski in the Gunnison country. This is an 18-year-old Gunnison High School boy by the name of Carl Easterly. The year is 1938. Easterly is on Quicks Hill, and he is doing something that nobody had ever done before. He has built up a jump, and he is doing a backflip. Next. Here he is after World War II, 1946, Sun Valley, Idaho. He is making a promotional movie for an early TV program called You Asked For It. You can see the guys on the right filming and watching as Carl Easterly and his brother Verl are being pulled by an ancient helicopter at about 50 miles an hour. Next. They did a flip over that wooden fence, and then Verl Easterly fell. And Carl Easterly also fell on his first try to go across a 75-yard long pond on alpine skis. Carl told me that he thought he'd have more resistance, but he didn't, so he fell. And he said he damn near froze to death before they could get him thaw out and tried it again. Next. On his second attempt, he makes it. Next. And now he does another backflip over another wooden fence. Whenever I gave this during Flushing, and I'll do it again this year, I always say there are a lot of hotshot skiers in the audience, but for his time, he was the best there ever was. He lived at Silverthorne, and until he died at the age of 94, 4 years ago, after my presentation at Flushing, I would call him up, and I would say, Carl, I introduced you again, the best there ever was. And I know he enjoyed it very much. Next. There is February the 13th, 1938. And I know Dan Bender, the marketing man for the Monarch ski area, is on board. This is Marshall Pass, an adjacent pass to Monarch. February 13th, 1938. 407 people taken by the Rio Grande Railroad from Salida up the east side of Marshall Pass to the top. 10,846 feet. 120 people taken by the Rio Grande from Gunnison up the west side of the pass, and they all gathered together to ski down to switches. Now, some of the people tobogganed. Some skied down to the Charbonneau switch, where a railroad engine would come down with a car and pick you up and bring you back up for 10 cents. A man named Willie the Porter played the accordion, kind of like the earlier version of Pete Dunda, and people danced the polka. Inside of the Marshall Pass house, they had people who ate and just relaxed and drank beer. And it was a wonderful evening, and a lot of people dreamed of the day they might have a ski area either on Marshall or Monarch Pass. Next. There is 1924 on the east side of Monarch Pass, and people are now being able to walk up from Poncha Springs or catch the train to the Monarch mine, to the town of Monarch, right where the limestone quarry is today, and then ski down. This is 1924, young lady. Next. There is Vail Pass. Now, everybody looks at that and said, Vanna Bush, you're out of your damn mind. How can that be Vail Pass when Salida is 23 miles to the east and Gunnison 42 miles to the west? Well, here's the story. The man in charge of building New Monarch Pass, 1939, was a man named Charlie Vail, the highway commissioner. Very arrogant. And he wanted to name the pass after himself instead of Monarch, which had always been the name. But the local people did not like that, and they kept throwing this sign in the ditch. And they crossed out the name Pass, so it read Vail's ass. And finally, Charlie Vail gave up, and the sign was restored to Monarch. But Charlie Vail got even, and as all of you know, going from the Copper Mountain ski area over to Vail, you go over Vail Pass, 10,603 feet. But that sign existed for about a week. Next. There is the Western States ski team on Rosamond Hill in 1952. The guy on the left is Sven Wick. And over Sven's shoulder, you can barely make out the sign. It says, tow tickets, $1. That's at Rosamond Hill. The guy, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, is a guy named Lynn Levy, who came out of Louisiana, never having been on skis, and 4 years later represented the United States in the Olympic Games. Just went into the Western State Hall of Fame. 92 years old, became a medical doctor operating out of Sun Valley, Idaho. Next. There is Chicken Ranch. That is about 1 mile up the Slate River, where local people would take the train going up to Anthracite, get off, and then build up jumps and really come straight down. This is 1935 Chicken Ranch. Next. That's the way we used to line up to get on the gondola. Everybody lining up. You get 3 people in one gondola. It took 10 minutes to get to the top. Very inefficient way of getting people up there, but it was the best we had at that time. And long line, because those were the glory days of skiing when that was really the thing to do in the 1960s. Next. There is the Crested Butte Ski Patrol in the 70s. Some of them you might remember. Tracy Wickland in the back, third from the left. Jeff Schneider, 2 over. Charlie Pulcinelli, second from the right in the back. In the front, Ron Kovanik, the head of the patrol, and then on the right, Eric Lamb. These are all guys about the middle 1970s. Tracy, I think, was the only woman member of the ski patrol, maybe Susan Spence or Robin Spence. And now with Krista Hildebrand and a lot of others, there are a lot of women on the ski patrol at Crested Butte. Next. This is January 1952, Elk Avenue in Crested Butte. Why that car is on the right side of the street, I have no idea. Because everybody during the winter put their car up on blocks and drained the water out of the radiator. because none of the streets were plowed and you're not going anywhere. And to get into the business establishments, you had to tunnel in. Now, they used to say, the old timers used to say, the only crop that never fails is snow. Next. There is myself. This would be about 1969. I'm on top of Copper Lake, heading over East Maroon Pass. We used to do that every year, and skiing down East Maroon Creek and on into Aspen. We'd stay overnight at Gothic and then ski in. It's a wonderful trip. And of course, it was always done in the spring of the year when everything was set up, and you never went if there was a blizzard. You can see that's a clear day. Next. There's Camp Hale, home of the 10th Mountain Ski Division off Tennessee Pass, not far from Leadville. 14,300 men served. 946 died on Riva Ridge and in the Apennines and the Alps in 1944 and 45 in Europe. And whenever these guys got a little time off, they would go to Aspen and sleep on the Hotel Jerome floor. And they would ride the boat tow about 500 yards up Ajax or Aspen Mountain. Boat tow could carry 8 people, powered by a cable in the back end of a car wheel. And then to stay warm, they drank the most famous drink of them all, a thick chocolate malt shake spiked by 7 shots of bourbon. And they said when you drank that, you never got cold. And they had a famous song, and something like this. There are systems and theories of skiing. One thing I surely have found, skiing's just good in the winter, but the drinking's good all year around. Next. This is Howelson Hill, Steamboat Springs, one of the great jumping hills. Now, I gave Crosby Perry Smith's eulogy at the Olympic Lodge at Howelson Hill. And there, they got a lighted hill. They got 10-meter jump, 30-meter jump, 50-meter jump, 70-meter jump, and they got kids running slalom gates well into the night. And it's not unusual that Steamboat has turned out over 110 Olympic skiers and jumpers. Next. Berthoud Pass, 1938. One of the early ski areas in Colorado. Walk up, ski down. Next. Aspen, Colorado, 1947, Little Nell. You look at that photograph and you can see that there aren't too many buildings in downtown Aspen. They had a lot of great World Cup races there very early. 1951, the first FIS race, and Aspen became one of the great well-known ski areas in the world. Next. Robel-Strobauer, second head of the ski school. Sven Wick was the first head for a year. Robel's daughter, Lisa Blunk, still lives in Crested Butte, and his grandson, Aaron, is an Olympic skier. Next. Monument, Crested Butte, 1972. 2 skiers come off Monument and looking at the development of the Crested Butte ski area far below, about 2,000 feet down below. Next. There's Aspen, Colorado, 1948, Chair 1. Now, I had a chance to ride that a lot in the early 1960s. And 1-person chair, blanket over your legs to keep you warm. And if you look in the background, there are city blocks and half a city blocks with nothing on them. And you could have bought a lot for $100. You could have bought the whole damn block probably for $5,000. A little more expensive today. So Aspen, Colorado, one of the greatest of them all. When I skied there in the middle 60s, if you showed your driver's license and you had a Western Slope address, the cost of a ticket was $5. If you didn't, it was $6. They tell me it's a little more today. Next. Crested Butte Ski Patrol, 1966. Left to right, Jeff Jacobson, John Burns, Mike Zaradka, Walt Fricke, George Sibley, Don Bachman, and Billy Schweitzer. Next. That is the north face. And I just gave an article to Mount Riemann of the Crested Butte newspaper on the opening of the North Face. It first opened for skiers winter of 71, 72. And when I was doing my book on the Gunnison country, I would take the ski patrol up there and I said, guys, I want to get some pictures. But they never quite figured it out. I'd always say, now, guys, I'm going to go ahead and ski down and get my camera set up. So guess who always got the first tracks? You can see in the background, the ski patrollers are waiting. And Vandenbush has got first tracks and knee-deep powder. Oh, what great memories. Next, Steve Manfredo, one of the great backcountry skiers ever. One of the great ski patrollers ever. One of the great classical piano players ever. Died of pulmonary edema while descending Communist Peak in Russia about 30 years ago. As a young boy, he had scarlet fever, it scarred his heart, and he died of a heart attack at 14,000 feet. When they had the memorial at the Cement Creek Ranch, 2,000 people showed up, including a lot of United States senators. Next. That is Crested Butte in 1962, the winter 62-63, and that is Paul Johnston's Ore Bucket Lodge. And you can imagine that's the only thing there then. Just imagine all the buildings, including the Chamber of Commerce building, that are there today. Next. This is an avalanche right behind Three Seasons. And in 1986, I think it was, a couple of boys from Texas are waiting in the parking lot to go home with their parents. That slide came down, went into the parking lot and killed one of the boys. Today, if you look up there, they got a big snow fence to stop that. Next. Crested Butte at night, January 1, 1958. Bob Arnold, good friend of mine, took that photo. Next. This is the gondola with 3 pair of skis ready to go uphill. Next. There are the Flying Bambini brothers. 10 guys, 7 from Crested Butte. On T-Bar Hill, West Wall today, there's a big open bowl. You go down. And these guys went down the bowl holding hands, built up about a 4 or 5 foot jump, went up in the air about 30 feet, holding hands, landed the jump, still holding hands. G.J. Santelli took that photograph, 1973. The Flying Bambini brothers with their legendary Top Gun Roger Ramjet Evans. Next. Father Leo McKenna blessing the gondola, January 1963. After blessing, the thing went out of the shack 50 feet, broke down the rest of the day. And then on his way to the parking lot, Father McKenna slipped and fractured a kneecap. A very inauspicious beginning for the gondola. Next. John Norton started this in the 1990s. He was the head of the Crested Butte ski area, free skiing. Publicized the heck out of Crested Butte and brought a lot of skiers in very early who ordinarily wouldn't have come in. And that lasted for about 3 or 4 years. Next. Now, the guy on the left is Charlie Bainey. The guy on the right is Al Johnson. They are at Irwin, 1883, prior to or just after a race. There are the two of the greatest there ever were. Next. Sven Wick and the Western State College ski team pushing a weenie wagon that has run out of gas out at Fraser en route to Winter Park, 1950s. Next. Well, I always like to kid. This is Mayor Jim Schmidt when he came into Crested Butte very early, down on his luck. And you can see his pack mule, and he's ready to go out and see if he can find a little gold. And I know Mayor Schmidt is on board today, and Jim, I hope you like that one. I hope your wife likes it. Next. This is the Western State ski team going over East Maroon Pass in the 1970s en route to Aspen. They did that every November if there was enough snow. Next. Are the slalom gates on the Rosman Hill ski area. Bamboo poles. and a guy from DU coming down, Denver University coming down. Next. There is the warming house. John Savoda on the left, Freddie Root Beer higher. Next to him, Steve Terrell, second from the right, and Steve Monfredo on the right. 1960s. Next. These are people at Crystal, Colorado, hiking up on an avalanche chute. They figured that an avalanche came down, so it couldn't come down anymore. 1886. Next. There is a jumper coming off of Tower 7 at Crested Butte during Floushing. Some of these guys even did flips. And one of them, Michael Grazier, in 1973, hit the first successful triple backflip in history off of Tower 7. Next. There are people skating on Maroon Lake with the maroon bells in the background. It doesn't get any more beautiful than that. Next. There is a shot of one of my favorite shots of Crested Butte, looking at the Elk Mountains in the dead of winter. Next. That may be the final one. That is a shot of the warming house on December the 31st, 1968. They had a big polka party inside. I walked outside, got lucky, took that photograph. Always liked it. And then over on the right, you can see part of the gondola shack. Next. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. I hope you all like the history of skiing in the Gunnison country. And now we are going to go into the chat box and get ready for the trivia question. And Stu is going to tell you how to answer.
So for the trivia question, once it's asked, just type your answer into the chat box and we'll be able to see who responded first and correctly. And they will be our trivia winner.
The first come, first serve. And the book you're going to get is one called Crested Butte. Photograph copy. And incidentally, some of the people who won before, yours was sent out last week, so you should have them right now. So here is the trivia question, or two trivia questions. First come, first serve. You got them, have them both correct. Question number one. I want to know the great snowshoe carrier, postal carrier, mail carrier from Tin Cup, who went from St. Elmo to Aspen for 38 years. And the second one, I want to know the name of the two missionaries who skied into Washington Gulch and into Animas Forks in the early 60s, 1860s. Two trivia questions, and we await the answer. We're looking for the chat box. We got one. It's Dyer's one, but not to Alex Parent, Dyer and Darley. Mark Ellis has got it. Mark Ellis has got it. Mark, what I want you to do when you have a chance is give your address to Stu. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are open for questions or comments. Are there any questions? How much snow in Crested Butte, says Jim Belfast. Jim, the forecast says we're supposed to get 16 inches. I don't know what's falling now, about 6 inches today, but it was snowing like heck when I came out of Gunnison. We've been in a good snow belt here for the last week, and the skiing, I skied yesterday and it was real good. Pete Junda joined a little late, but you're on, Pete. Any other questions or comments?
If you have a question, feel free to type it. There we go. Perfect.
There we go right now. You fellows stumbled a little bit coming out of the box, but made up for it. All right, thanks,
That's
Keith.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Catherine Keller, thanks. I already won the quiz earlier, so didn't compete to give others a chance. There's Mark Ellis's address.
Cool.